He was born on October 23rd, 1959.
There hadn't been a baby in the family for quite a few years.
Alfred's the only child after 10 years, so that made me the happiest man in Lynwood.
He was raised in Lynwood, California. It was an all-American city at that time.
It was an upper middle class, nice neighborhood.
They're a good Christian family, and I think that helped keep him on the straight and narrow.
Hey! Al's parents were very conservative. They were older than the other parents.
He grew up surrounded by adults.
He didn't go out many places by himself.
Al was sheltered quite a bit and not allowed to do things perhaps that other kids do.
We watched over him very carefully. All of us did. My mother used to put him in dresses because she was sewing for the other little kids in the family.
We just dance on one leg and turn around.
But it never got past the backyard.
He had an amazing mind for figuring things out.
He could remember things that astounded me.
He just seemed gifted in that way.
Al loved to add strings of numbers, and the more challenging, the better.
I'd say 24 and 36, and he'd figure it up in his head, and he'd give me some bigger numbers.
It was always difficult when Al was little because he was so smart that he always craved more.
First day of school, he just went and set up on the school steps and just waited for the doors to open, and he was ready to go to school. One day he was in the hallway, and some of the kids were teasing him, and they put him up against the wall, and they said, spell supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And he says, I just gave them a bunch of letters. He says, they didn't know the difference. And he said, I just walked right past them.
Alfred knew how to hold his own, I tell you the truth. Not through his fisticuffs or anything like that, but through his knowledge.
One of the teachers in his grammar school noticed that he was through with his work faster, and she says, you better get something else for him to do to keep him interested, you know.
So when a salesman came to the door and offered accordion lessons, it seemed like the perfect option, and they signed him right up.
He could have had accordion lesson or some other lesson, trumpet or something. We chose accordion.
I was tickled pink when Alfred started.
He took to it, and he just had a ball.
It sounded like it was a little one-man band.
He was playing quite well in no time.
He was always practicing with the thing.
I think he had written something like 20 songs. We would give him money like most parents do, you know, for a little show.
He'd play out in the backyard there, entertain the neighbors and everybody.
He lived across the street from Lynwood High School.
He really wasn't allowed to do a whole lot, you know, as far as extracurriculars or, you know, go hang out with the guys.
He was kept out of sports because there was a fear of getting injured.
His parents would watch him from across the street.
His mom would be out there with the binoculars when they were doing PE.
Our family is very weird.
It would embarrass him.
We'd just watch him when they'd come out at recess time in their gym classes.
We kept an eye on him, see that no harm came to him till he was big enough to take care of himself.
It's a little hard to find yourself when, you know, you've got mom looking through the binoculars at you.
I would say Al was probably a nerd in high school.
He was smarter than everybody.
A little bit of a nerd.
Trying to avoid that word.
A nerd?
He was a nerd. He actually had that mad scientist look.
He had really curly hair, and since it was the year of the afro, he had let it grow into this giant, huge head of fur. And his head looked like a clown's head.
Kind of like chia pet hair.
He was just odd.
He thought he was funny, sometimes at the wrong times. One particular incident, here's somebody, I think they're going to throw up, they're sick. So I turn around and I see this child just laying out there against the chair, and all this plastic vomit on his shirt.
That's one good thing about the Yankovic. They were all comedians in one way. Yes.
Humor was one of the things that he found worked for him, and he enjoyed it.
We were in the speech team together. It was a fun group made up of other misfits.
He used all of that humor to create these incredible stories.
Al would usually use things out of the Mad magazines, and interpret them in his own way.
He won every event because he really let himself go completely. We were at one competition, and on the way back, we had a 6-seat car and 7 bodies, so someone had to sit on someone's lap. And this girl was the smallest, and I said, why don't you sit on Al's lap? And she turned around, she said, I don't like him and I don't want to have to sit on his lap. She was totally freaked out, and she looked like she was going to cry. I felt bad for him.
You could tell that it did embarrass him.
Back in the 1970s, there was a radio program called the Dr. Demento Show. Well, that particular program kind of showcased an eclectic selection of songs.
Risque songs have always been part of my show.
We weren't allowed to listen to Dr. Demento.
Davy's got the cutest little dinghy in the Navy, things like that.
Some of the songs had bad words.
Al's mother happened to hear Al listening to my show and said, turn that off. That's filthy. So Al had to listen to it in secret for a while.
He spent a lot of time in his room. I don't know what he did.
Let me tell you about the school cafeteria.
We used to write songs together.
He would record songs for Dr. Demento using an 8-track.
Not every one of those songs was worth its weight in gold. But he sent me Belvedere Cruising.
He used to drive a Plymouth Belvedere.
Going Belvedere cruising tonight, etc.
Just watch me pass that Porsche on the right.
I put that on the air right away, and sure enough, it started getting reaction not just from Lynwood, but from all over Southern California.
He started getting a lot of airplay and a lot of recognition.
We heard over a dozen songs on Sunday evenings that he had on the Dr. Demento Show.
Everybody used to talk about Al on Monday. Well, look, there's Al. He has a song on the radio.
That did make him kind of a minor celebrity there at Lynwood High School.
That's where Al Yankovic kind of came out of his shell and did his thing.
He was certainly the best-known student by the time he graduated.
Alfred was our school valedictorian.
I was so proud of that deal because far better than I ever done, I'll tell you.
If we want a better future, changes are imperative, and it is up to every one of us to assume the responsibility of change.
Al graduated early at 16 and a half.
I don't think that high school was a real wonderful time in his life. I think it was a means to an end to get to college or to get to be an adult, to get away from his parents and to find himself.
Al wanted to be a performer.
Music probably gave him a little hope that, hey, maybe there's something out there that could really work for me.
Al, he always wanted to be a performer or an entertainer.
He didn't really take seriously the possibility of music being his life work quite yet.
There wasn't much call for rock and roll accordion. His parents wanted him to go into architecture.
Cal Poly has a really difficult architecture program to get into.
Part of his ethics were mom and dad will be very disappointed if I go off and do some non-productive educational program. So I'll do the hardest one that there is.
I don't think that he really hit the books as much as the rest of us had to.
I remember times in school where he'd memorize a whole book for a test.
His brain, it has this quality about it, this sponge-like quality that nothing really gets away.
The first time that I saw Al, I didn't know whether or not he was this little wonderful genius or he was this serial killer.
Al was one of the wackier personalities in college.
Every time he'd walk through the hallways, he would just kind of stare at us. One of the guys would say, "Hey, Weird Al." And he would just stare and just keep on going. And that's where he got his nickname. I walked into Al's room. It looked like a 747 had just completely crashed into the room. And in the corner of the room was his accordion. And I said, "Can you play that thing?" He says, "What do you want to hear?" I asked him if he could play some Elton John. So he came out into the lobby of the dormitory, and he started playing his accordion. And we were just awestruck. I played bongos. And so Al and I played probably until about 2, 3 in the morning, and we just had a blast. We had a really good time. Just to be able to get in front of people and speak through his accordion was, I think, a great thing for him to do, to kind of knock down the barriers of being so shy. So we put together an act. We did a series of coffee houses.
Kind of an open mic thing where people could come and perform.
It was bongo drums, Jew's harp, and Al on the accordion.
When we were low on content, well, let's call up Al in the dorms. He'll come down and play. After we had some serious, socially important music, Al, he would come down and sing the entire periodic table of the elements.
There is yttrium, ytterbium, actinium, rubidium.
It's a great song by Tom Lear. Harmonium and whatever it is.
Samarium and beryllium, lithium, beryllium, and barium.
People were kind of confused.
There's holmium and helium and hafnium and erbium.
And the audience would just look blank. And then a few would start laughing, and the rest would start laughing.
Here's a guy that has problems carrying on a conversation with one person, and now he is speaking to hundreds of people through his music, and they are digging it.
The next half, I'd like y'all to sing along, okay?
And after we got our standing ovation, I remember turning to him and going, "Wow, Al, I just can't believe we're getting this kind of reception from people." When I saw the look on his face, I knew that he wanted to do this for the rest of his life.
Al was one of the DJs at KCPR, campus radio station in Cal Poly.
Welcome to Cal Poly!
He had the 9 p.m. to midnight shift on Saturday.
He decided to name it the Weird Al Show, from the nickname that he got in the dorms.
We kind of came in with this format we didn't have a clue as to what to do with.
Hi, this is Weird Al.
It was a very strange blend of rock and roll, comedy, and original stuff.
He was trying to be the Cal Poly version of Dr. Demento.
He'd put on Debbie Boone.
Light up my life.
And his show always started off with a big record scratch.
And we were all just sitting there, the anticipation building, just waiting for the needle to be ripped off the record.
That's right, it's time for the Weird Al Show.
Our Debbie Boone records were trashed.
He played We Will Rock You by Queen, but he billed it as a new single by the Vienna Boys Choir, and he played it at 45.
He was wild on the radio.
By request, hyperactive chicken.
Al got more requests and more phone calls in than any other show there.
He developed a little cult following.
People would stop what they were doing on Saturday nights at 9 o'clock and tune into the radio.
So they gave him a little more leeway than most people.
He was free to pretty much do what he wanted.
He got to break all the rules in the book. It was 3 hours of the best radio in California.
Being a DJ was a conduit for him doing what he really wanted to do, because he was a songwriter. He would take these songs and just script them out, and he would be really good.
Al had come up with this idea of My Bologna, which was based on a song by the Knack called My Sharona.
The acoustics in our production area were terrible. So he decided, why not run wire from the production room across the hall into the men's room? So he recorded My Bologna in the men's room.
And it gave him this great echo effect.
My Bologna. My Bologna.
The members of the Knack happened to hear it on my show.
My girlfriend Sharona was there with me, and we listened to it and just howled.
Never gonna stop, eat it up. Such a tasty snack, I always eat too much and throw up.
I called up my friend and our A&R guy, Bruce Ravid, at Capitol Records and said, "You gotta sign this guy."
There were lots and lots of takeoffs on My Sharona, Rice-A-Roni, Ayatollah, but there was something about My Bologna.
Capitol agreed to do it. At that point in time, they'd do anything the Knack wanted them to. It was the biggest act that they had.
I called up this guy, Weird Al Yankovic, at college and told him we wanted to put the record out.
When Al had the single on Capitol, oh my God, what an event. We couldn't believe it.
We paid him something in the neighborhood of $500. It was really a bargain basement kind of a situation. It's not like there was a bidding war for the guy.
He said, this is great, you know, I've got a company behind me, I'm going to put out a lot more stuff.
When Al called his mother to tell her that he had signed a major label deal, her reaction was, "Oh, that's nice. So tell me, are you eating enough? Is your bed made?" We promised him one single, and then we had an option for more, depending on how that single performed. The single didn't sell all that well.
He had only sold like 10,000 copies of My Bologna, and they interpreted that as being a non-hit.
Capitol wasn't interested in any of his other songs.
I tried to get Capitol to stick with him because I believed he had talent and that what he was doing was very funny and very credible. Capitol, in their infinite wisdom, didn't see it like that.
There wasn't a real feeling downstairs at Capitol Records that this guy had longevity. I had the very unpleasant task of having to drop Weird Al.
Al continued to make musical parodies and send them in to Dr. Demento.
Even though he was studying architecture, he was driven by his love of music. He wrote to me, he said, "I love recording. I wish I could get a job in the music industry instead of architecture."
His heart was not in the architecture. He'd pass his classes and go to the radio station and have fun.
There were usually a crowd of people hanging out at the radio station whenever he was on the air.
You'd have to be deaf to not understand how funny he was, and how inventive he was, and how clever he was.
Everybody liked Al, except for the person who took over the radio station. She was not enthusiastic about Al's show.
That general manager was interested in seeing more top 40 types of music being played on the station.
Christopher Cross and Sailing and Air Supply. Nothing that anybody at college would want to listen to.
Well, that didn't quite meet Al's format, but he would play music off of that list.
I know just how to whisper.
But he would play them backwards, or play them at the wrong speed, or play them with chicken noises over them or something.
He was doing a lot of things that made the general manager very, very angry.
He did a skit where KCPR management had apparently taken over the Weird Al show, and in the background you hear Al like he's tied up.
We will be playing regular, formatted, mellow, and familiar music.
And then Weird Al manages to get loose.
Get away from that! Get loose! And stop it!
I don't think they took too kindly to that one. They started putting more and more restrictions on Al.
It became a nightmare. They were continually holding him back. He was just essentially in a straitjacket, and you can't confine him like that. He's too creative. Eventually, he just said, I can't do this anymore.
Technically, Al was not fired from KCPR, but it basically became impossible for him to do his show, and he just quit. He was devastated. It was the only time I've ever seen him cry. It was his passion, it was his life, it was his creative outlet. And when they forced him out, he was a broken man. So he would travel down quite a bit to visit the Dr. Demento show.
Time once again for the Dr. Demento show!
He was part of the Dr. Demento family.
We would be in the studio just making funny little sounds while Dr. Demento was introducing the show.
Al would show up to holler,
"The doctor is here!"
Al was often off in a corner by himself, writing.
He was sitting back, chuckling to himself. I had no idea what he was writing.
And Al said he was ready to do his new song, and would I let him sing it live on the air?
And he asked if I would pound on his accordion case while he did a parody of Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, called Another One Rides the Bus.
Another one rides the bus, and another comes on, and another comes on, another one rides the bus.
It was great. It became one of the top request songs ever. They kept playing it over and over.
Stations all around the country were demanding copies of it.
We started getting just flooded with phone calls of people wanting to interview Al.
Al calls me and says, you know that thing we did?
Another one rides the bus.
It's a hit. And when I finish school, I'm going to come back to LA. I want to start recording some stuff. I said, you need to have a band. I'll be your drummer. I had no idea what I was getting into.
As time went on at Cal Poly, music became more and more important to him, and his grades in architecture started to drop off a little bit.
Towards his senior year, he finally got his first lousy grade. He made a model that wasn't up to snuff. So Al threw it off his third-story balcony of his apartment building.
He didn't pass the class. This class cost him his graduation.
And it was very demoralizing to him.
He had to spend an additional summer session making up that class, and Al was very disappointed with that. He had in his mind he was going to move down to Los Angeles, get his life together, just get everything going, and this was a real deep disappointment for him.
By the time he graduated, he had lost a lot of his drive to have architecture be his career.
At that point, he was so close to graduating, it was just something he needed to do.
His parents were still intent that he have a career and not just be a floundering musician. So they made a little compromise that Al could have a year in which to prove himself as a musician. So he was really going to have to be damn good to make a living at it. But I think he also realized that he was damn good.
Right after college, Al came immediately down to Los Angeles because that's where the record business was. And he knew that he wanted to be in some way, shape, or form in the music business. His first apartment was in an area where you were on a first-name basis with guys from the local SWAT team.
It was just so nasty. The elevator just reeked of urine. I don't think he even noticed that there was, drunks sleeping in the lobby.
His bathroom didn't really have anything in it except for a roll of toilet paper.
He had a fork, a knife, and a spoon taped up on his wall. I said, Al, why do you have utensils on your wall? And he said, well, every time my friends come over, they tell me I need to put something on my wall. So now I've got something on my wall.
He'd be actually so broke that we would set up in a little corner on the street. He'd open his accordion case, and we'd play and sing, and people would throw money in, and we'd split that.
He was willing to do what was ever necessary, to have low-paying jobs, to do whatever so he could do his music.
The only job he could get was a job in the mailroom at Westwood One. And that's enough to pay the bills while he continued to work on his songs and try to make it in the industry.
All he cared about was he had a roof over his head, some place to develop the music and work on getting a record contract.
We would sit on the floor and we would come up with these musical parodies, but most of all, we would dream about what he wanted to do with his life.
I don't think there was a lot of people who believed that he was really going to stand out and actually be able to make a living at this.
He took some of his savings and pressed up 1,000 or so copies of an EP containing Another One Rides the Bus.
I went with him to all the record stores around town and, can you put 6 of these on your counter? And they sold for $4 a piece back then.
So after a week of the record being out on the market, Al had run in and said, Eric, guess what? We sold 8 copies of my record at Boo Boo Records this week. So my roommate Brad and I sort of looked at each other and I said, well, Al, Brad bought 4 copies and I bought 3 copies. So he was a little dejected after that.
A couple months later, TK Records came around.
That deal just sort of fell into his lap. TK Records released Another One Rides the Bus. And shortly thereafter, Al got booked on Tom Snyder's Tomorrow Show.
I just remember Bermuda going, we're going to be on the Tom Snyder Show. This thing is going national. You guys are going to see. This is going to be really big. And I was just like, yeah, right.
Here is Weird Al Yankovic.
Al was definitely a novelty comedy artist with these horrible patchwork velvet pants and a red polyester leisure suit jacket, and me in a tuxedo on my knees pounding on this accordion case. It was terrible.
Weird Al Yankovic, Mr. John Schwartz. Beautiful work, gentlemen.
I don't think Al even met Tom.
I'll tell you, when he was a baby, his mother says, what a picture. His father tried to hang him already.
They had something called Bubbling Under, the Hot 100, and Another One Rides the Bus, charted.
Unfortunately, TK itself went belly up very shortly after that.
It was literally the last single they released.
He never saw a dime.
That was a very difficult time for him.
Even with a single and a national TV appearance, I don't know that there was even a spark that Al was anything more than just kind of a flash-in-the-pan novel sort of a thing.
Everybody thought Al might be a one-shot, one-song kind of guy.
Nobody could have seen it going any further.
Weird Al Yankovic was very much struggling to get some notoriety.
I was managing Dr. Demento, and Al was the most requested artist on the Dr. Demento show. Another One Rides the Bus at that time was going through the roof. Dr. Demento had a live show that he would take around.
I'm going to share him and his band with you here at the Wax Museum right now.
I'd just go out and I'd get on stage at a nightclub or at a college.
And we invited Al to come out and perform.
Dementites and Dementoids, Weird Al Yankovic.
We had no idea how Al was really in front of an audience. I was standing in the wings watching what was going on, and the effect that he was having on this audience was mind-boggling.
Hungry one, open up a package of my
Jay immediately decided that he wanted to work with him.
I'm thinking, like, my God, what this would sound like if he put a band together and actually performed these with a band, it would kill.
The band, it was me, Steve J on bass, Jim West on guitar, and then Al, of course, on accordion.
We were rehearsing at little dive rehearsal studios.
We had a gig at Knott's Berry Farm in the Los Angeles area.
Which I think was his first solo concert. And Al was so unknown that they spelled his name wrong on the marquee. They spelled it Wired Al instead of Weird Al.
That's really frustrating for Al. I mean, he's a compulsive perfectionist with regard to grammar.
I remember a couple of shows that didn't go so well. Al was booked to open for Missing Persons.
They were big at that time. He was so excited.
We had been told that we were perfect to open for this band because although they were a punk band, they had a humorous side to their music.
But apparently a new wave, punkish kind of audience is not the right audience for accordion music.
When we hit the stage, it was just instant wall of hatred coming at us.
Not really a comedy-loving crowd.
Everyone giving us the finger, snarling, hateful expressions.
It was a nightmare. It was just an absolute nightmare.
True, vehement hatred, spitting, angry, vile.
They threw many things.
I saw a plastic cup come and hit Al right there, right between the eyes, kind of knock his glasses to the side. And I saw him, like, kind of not, like, recovering from his injury, put the glasses back on, just being totally freaked out. And at that moment, this tiger rose up inside of me, and it was like, them.
Al just decided that he was not going to let them chase him off the stage. He was going to do his show.
And then it became incredible fun.
He stayed up there just to piss him off. Oh, you hate this? Wait for the next one. Oh, you didn't like that? See how this is.
The only good thing about the show was that they were pelting him with change, and he was still pretty poor back then. So he was able to scrounge up probably $20 worth of change.
Needless to say, we didn't get an encore. After that, Al's walking to his car.
There was a kid there.
I said, "Are you that guy that played the accordion?
Are you Weird Al?" And Al said, "Yeah." And the kid says, "You suck.
You suck."
You suck.
That was sort of the capper on the evening.
Al came up with the idea of doing I Love Rocky Road, a parody of I Love Rock and Roll, which was a huge Joan Jett hit at the time.
Al went to the writer of the song, which was not Joan Jett, but Jake Hooker.
And I said, "Who the hell's Weird Al? And why are you calling me? You know, I'm like enjoying my success right now. I don't really want anyone making fun of my song."
I mean, some people you have to sort of walk them through it.
I wasn't going to let my song be made a joke of.
It's a parody.
A parody is one thing.
Here's how we'll do it.
To make a bad-sounding record is not, to me, funny.
No, it's not offensive.
They sent me lyrics. I thought they were funny.
Jake said, "You know what? I manage Rick Derringer, fantastic producer. And I think Rick might be interested in working with Al on another single."
I said, "We shouldn't be thinking about making a single. This guy should make an album."
You don't make money releasing singles.
Jake was able to wangle us some spec time to do a whole album.
Al was really excited to do
his first album.
We thought, well, this is great. We'll probably make this one record and that'll be it.
Al was very, very meticulous in the studio.
He put these ideas together in this cohesive manner that normal people just can't do.
He had like a loose sleeve book with everything completely written out. I remember he would want to keep doing the takes over and over again until they were really, in his mind, perfect.
One time he scheduled my bathroom appointment.
They finished the album, which was pretty good.
And then the shopping began to all the different labels.
It wasn't as easy as we thought.
We took it everywhere, and of course, everyone passed.
Nobody wanted to sign him.
There weren't too many people doing funny music on albums, so it was a tough road to hoe.
One of my fondest memories is calling people saying, hi, I'm a manager of an artist named Weird Al Yankovic, and having people say, oh, that's too bad.
They didn't get it. I said, you're not going to get airplay. No rock radio is going to play this stuff. I remember this one guy was president of a very famous label. He said, I can't do it. It's embarrassing. You know, my friends will think I'm an idiot.
All the labels told us, this is great. This is going to be very successful. But we don't really want to do it.
So I took the tape of I Love Rocky Road to a radio station in Los Angeles.
The program director loved it and put it on the air right away. And it became one of their most top requested songs, was getting played all the time.
That enabled us to bring it back out, in essence, to the labels. And again, people were, you know, essentially just saying, no, it doesn't prove anything, except for Tad Dowd.
I loved it. I thought it was unique, brilliant. In his creative way, he knew what really worked.
Tad came from old school show business.
There's a whole philosophy to me. Who's the genius? Let the public decide.
He saw this was about great entertainment.
We signed him.
And at that point, things began to roll.
When Al got signed to this record deal, he was so excited he made photocopies of his contract and gave it to all his friends.
When we signed with Scotti Brothers, we have essentially an album that's fully recorded. But I Love Rock and Roll at that point had become pretty dated.
They still really needed a hit single.
We needed something a little more current.
The big hit at that moment was Mickey by Tony Basil.
So we cut a song called Ricky, a song about Lucy and Ricky Ricardo.
Ricky was going to be the single, so they needed to do a video.
It just felt like, well, this is part of the culture now, so you do it.
They did this on a shoestring budget.
They gave us $6,000.
A lot of Al's friends were in it.
Dr. Demento was in the video.
I'm one of the dancers at the end.
Hey, Ricky! And he had his friend Joe Miller, who was a beatnik playing bongos.
Ricky was not, by any stretch, a big hit.
The first album didn't do that much.
For some reason, radio wouldn't adopt and the video companies wouldn't adopt.
Everybody thought, for sure, this has got to be like a novelty act of all time. One record and that's it. And nobody in their right minds thought it was going to go beyond that.
Al had achieved some success with the first album.
It sold well enough so that the record company was eager to make another album with him.
Al was always keenly aware that for this thing to work, we have to stay current. So he was always looking for the biggest possible phenomenon at the time. And along comes Michael Jackson, the biggest thing since sliced bread.
Beat It was huge.
I think it took him all of 30 seconds to figure out Eat It.
Michael Jackson was such a monstrous star.
It was practically surreal, this notion of going to Michael Jackson and asking him for permission. And here's a guy who's being bombarded with every conceivable offer on planet Earth at that very precise moment. And here's this little UFO coming out of nowhere saying, oh, we'd like to do a parody of your biggest song. So, you know, part of us just felt like good luck even getting an answer. And he said yes.
It was important in the case of Eat It to really make it sound like Beat It.
He did a very convincing replication of the music. I always thought that the bong at the beginning of Eat It sounds a lot better than the one on Michael Jackson's original.
That's part of the gag. Al wants you to believe that you're listening to Michael Jackson, and all of a sudden the words are different. And that perfectionism began to show visually as well.
The Eat It video was a big deal.
A number of the dancers and extras from the Michael Jackson video were included.
We had Beat It up on a monitor next to us. We would make sure that the framing was precise to a T. The point was to have him doing the exact move of Michael's, and to have the camera move in on him the same way the camera moved in on Michael Jackson. That's what enhances the joke.
Eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it.
At that point, MTV was huge. With one video, you could be seen by every kid in the country.
Al became a star with Eat It. That was his breakthrough.
When Eat It went into rotation on MTV, instantly it seemed like we went from playing for a few hundred people to playing for thousands of people.
As Eat It and the In 3D album began to rise up the charts, the album goes gold, 500,000 copies. Things really began to happen.
Weird Al is bringing you the rest of the weather.
Weird Al Yankovic!
We got so much more attention. The venues became, bigger venues. We graduated from a motorhome to a tour bus.
Once he started getting some money on his own, he bought, of course, a much nicer car.
He moved into a nicer apartment.
He even got a waterbed.
The other thing is, girls were crazy about Al.
He had a girlfriend in every city. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Things were really happening for him.
It was like someone turned a switch, and all of a sudden, everybody loved us.
Eat It got nominated for Best Comedy Record.
We never went so far as to expect it.
And then he won a Grammy.
It was certainly one of the highlights of his life.
Even though it was for Best Comedy Recording, it was still a Grammy.
Winning that Grammy is a major proof that Al had made it, and it really achieved what he was trying to achieve.
He took that whole art of parody to another level.
The world began to notice that he was part of pop music, part of the pop culture.
All of a sudden, Al really became, I want to say he became a household name, but he didn't. He became the Eat It guy.
I was with Al the first time that a stranger came up to him and said, "Hey, you're that Eat It guy." You could obviously see that it had moved him. It was just another little bit of assurance that he was doing the right thing and doing it well.
Al is one of the most driven people that I know.
I used to tell him, you get what you put into life.
Changing his life was a long process of really proving himself over and over and over.
What he tries to do is take pop culture and turn it around and make you look at it in its face. And then you can see how absurd we are about what's popular.
Because Alfred didn't fit into the mainstream of society or the trendy people, I think it was his way of actually poking fun at them and getting back at them.
Ow! Al took some pressure off the nerd population, that's for sure.
I think people might be surprised to find out that Weird Al is not so weird at all, but he's just a really cool, hard-working guy who loves what he does.
He's bloomed a lot. He's certainly not a man of the world, and he's certainly not this introverted, pocket protector wearing, computer geek.
He's a nerd. But he's a cool nerd. He definitely is a cool nerd.
And so God bless all the nerds because he's done well.